I was an IT professional before becoming a monk. I always tell them, if you are into programming in computers, watch out. You don't know what's coming next. So, before we get started, we usually offer our prayers to our spiritual master, requesting them to give us their mercy and grace, because we always need it, no matter what we do. Even if we go to school, go to university, if you are looking to gain some knowledge, looking to gain some insight in anything, humility always pays. If we go to a classroom thinking, I know everything, we are just going to waste time there. Now, that's equally applicable for me too, despite me being the teacher here, because in spirituality, especially in our tradition of Bhakti Yoga, the source of knowledge always comes from the Supreme Divine. Each one of us, we can just act as a medium through whom the grace actually flows through us. And we offer the prayers so we become a transparent via medium. In fact, one of the role of a guru is to be the transparent via medium. Our spiritual master, Srila Prabhupada, he used to give this beautiful example. If I have to look at an object, we usually tend to think if there is something that's going to come between us and the object, it's going to stunt our vision, which is true, usually. However, some of you in this room, you are wearing glasses, and that's an object between you and me. But rather than stunting your vision, rather than blurring your vision, it's actually enhancing your vision. So same way, a spiritual master, a guru, is supposed to be enhancing one's vision, even though technically the role of guru is between the practicing Bhakti Yogi and the Supreme Divine. If we don't understand that role of the guru, either from a practitioner perspective, as a prospective disciple's perspective, or even if a spiritual guru thinks he or she is the Supreme, then the equation is actually going to be thrown out of whack here. So it's extremely important that we understand our position, that we are always the transparent via medium. Whether you take the role of a disciple, because whoever hears it today, if you go and share it with someone else tomorrow, then you become a guru, like that. Okay, so we always pray for the grace. So I'm just going to recite 3 short mantras. You can just hear. Beauty of this mantra is, you can take as much benefit simply by hearing it as I do by chanting. So that's the beauty. We both take the same credit. We both are all of us are in the same boat. So I'm just going to offer 3 short prayers. Won't take more than 20 seconds. So please close your eyes and hear attentively. Om Ajnana Timirandasya Jnananjana Shalakaya Chakshurunmilitam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Shiva Shadi Gaura Bhakta Vrinda. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Thank you. So today we are going to discuss about Bhagavad Gita. Bhagavad Gita, it takes its meaning from 2 Sanskrit words, Bhagavat and Gita. Bhagavat means the Supreme Divine, and Gita means the song. All the yoga texts, they are written in an ancient language called Sanskrit that you might have come across. It predates even Hebrew, Latin, most of the languages that we are aware of, even ancient languages. So, just like when we speak, in Australia, you speak English in a certain way. You go to India, people speak it differently. You go to South Africa, people speak differently with different accent. Similarly, there are some languages, even in a contemporary sense, if you go to some parts of India, you can actually see. If you hear, you close your eyes, you may not understand the language, but it will sound very pleasing, like a song. Sanskrit, interestingly, it is spoken. Okay, take it back. It's supposed to be sung. So in spiritual world, it's mentioned every day is a festival, every step is a dance, and every word is a song. So this is one language that's mentioned, it's spoken in the spiritual world. There are references in yoga texts that mention about that. So it pays to make some effort to try to learn it. Even if you don't know Sanskrit, you can still read by transliteration. I don't know Sanskrit, but I know a few verses in this I can recite. And you can even memorize, you can even recite. Seva Devi is good at it. She sings a lot of beautiful songs. She has been practicing Bhakti Yoga, I think, longer than any one of us. I remember visiting the temple in North Sydney, first time, and she was singing for the Sunday feast. I was surprised. So she's my first spiritual master in that sense. Singing the mantras. So this Gita is mentioned, at least there is a reference in Gita that says this is at least 5,000 years old. And the reason why we use at least is it's spoken by the same author in different instances of time. Just like I'm here today, I may share my knowledge of Gita with you, or rather my understanding of Gita with you. Right after this, I have another session which I'm supposed to give for the youth. So I found a place, an escape route. So as soon as I finish the class, I have to run to Parramatta Park to start online another session. Now, if at 8 o'clock, that session will go from 6 to 7. Let's say if at 8 o'clock somebody asked me, when was the last time you spoke Gita? I would say at 6 o'clock, even though I'm speaking the same Gita much earlier than 6, which is now. Same way, it's the same author. He gives the knowledge, but he gives the knowledge to different disciples at different point of time. The most recent instance when he has given this knowledge was 5,000 years ago, according to the reference that's given in the Gita itself. And the place where this Gita is spoken is quite interesting. He spoke this Gita in a battlefield of all the places. You would think, but why battlefield, So many places you could have spoken in a home, you could have spoken anywhere, in a park, in a temple, in some holy place. But of all the places, he chose a battlefield. And the first disciple who received this knowledge happens to be an army man. And guess what the knowledge actually which he received taught him? That he should just continue killing his enemies. It may sound very gory. In many ways, even prompting us to think, is this a book of violence? Just to clarify that point, let us say there is somebody in the street who is walking down with some valuables in hand. And there is a robber who is coming, showing a knife ready to kill that person. And there is a policeman who is witnessing what was about to happen. If the policeman acts quick, he can go stop the crime, even if it means he has to use violence, pull the gun out and shoot wherever is needed, for example. So violence is needed in order to maintain law and order in the world that we live in. Much more so when we are talking 5,000 years ago. And it will be even more so if you are talking 5,000 years from now. Sometimes you wonder, is things getting good or bad? Obviously it's going worse. I don't think any of us have any doubts about that. But the point here is, the same policeman, imagine if he thinks, I don't practice violence at all. I'm supposed to practice non-violence. I'm just going to sit and meditate. What do you think the consequence of such an action for that policeman? In all likelihood, he may be sacked. He may even be put behind the bar, actually, wherein there's a certain responsibility that's given to him. There's a certain empowerment that's given to him. He's supposed to act in a seemingly violent way, but not for his own personal agenda, but for the good of the general public. So same way here, the first disciple, he's an army man, not just yet another army man. He was the world's topmost archer at that point of time. And there was a war that is about to happen. And at that point, he realizes he is pitted in a very unusual circumstance wherein he has to fight this war against his own relatives, his own family men, his uncles, great-grandfathers, cousins, so on and so forth. But in a lead up to this war, what had happened in the past was, there are two sides, good and the bad side. The first disciple of this book, his name is Arjuna. He belongs to the good side. But at the time of the war, he's thinking, what's the point in fighting all this? It's like the policeman thinking, what's the point in, going and saving this life? Anyway, this guy is going to die. If he thinks like that, how stupid will that be? So same way Arjuna was thinking, yes, those guys were bad. They are the perpetrators here. You know what? I'm not interested in the kingdom anymore. You may not be interested, but what about your people? So this is the background in which the Supreme Divine, whose name is Krishna, he appears and then he gives this knowledge to Arjuna that it's not about just us, it's not about what we think is right, it's about what is best for everyone. And if that knowledge is actually coming from someone who is actually created this whole world, who maintained this world, who destroys this world, then that has to be taken as the supreme authority. So then Krishna tells to Arjuna that this is your duty as an army man. You have to go ahead and you have to fight, because there is something called natural justice. Even if you don't execute your duty, something will actually take over, and these guys, the bad guys, are going to die anyway. So this is the background in which this whole Bhagavad Gita is spoken, and that's the crux of the advice. Now, if you ask me this question, so, is the class over? Yes. Now, what is of interest to us is what conversation happened between Krishna and Arjuna? What conversation happened between the master and the disciple? If that master happened to be the supremely divine person, and if that disciple happened to be his best friend, what kind of advice did he receive? Bhagavad Gita, it is still relevant now, and the reason for that is human nature hasn't changed at all. Okay, if you go back 200 years ago, 300 years ago, 1000 years ago, as far as, how much ever our history books actually teaches, you will see the flavor changing, different people taken over by greed, different people taken over by anger, whatnot. But there is still an underlying common trait that is actually weaving all these incidents together. You can clearly put, yeah, that's understandable. There is nothing that you can go back and think, why did that guy act like this? Because you see parallels now, these days actually, even worse examples. So the point is, even though this book is actually spoken, as I said, at least 5,000 years ago, it is still very much relevant today as it was 5,000 years ago, and it will continue to be relevant 5,000 years from now. Reason is, the basic human nature doesn't change much. And that's what makes this book relevant. Otherwise, sometimes you go in the railway station evening, they give this free newspapers. You take it, so many people will grab them, read it. You go like an hour later, you will find it trashed everywhere, in the station, trains, everywhere. Because the news is no longer relevant. Okay, things move so fast. And then you have Gita, which is being read for 5,000 years, being distributed in millions, printed in millions, because unlike any other normal book that we come across, unlike any other normal newspaper that we come across, this book, interestingly, the genius of this book is it takes real life scenario wherein here is an army man who has problem with executing his duty, an army man who is having trouble with executing his job. Okay, that's relevant to all of us. I may be a student, I may be a doctor, I may be a monk even. You think a monk's life is peaceful? Yes and no. Do I regret? Absolutely not. So, the real life scenario is something which you can draw parallels, and each one of us, we can understand, we can relate to. Yes, that's understandable. There are instances where you have to put your foot down and draw the line, but then you may choose not to for whatever reason. So what Arjuna's dilemma, which he experienced 5,000 years ago, is something which is very relatable to us. But problem doesn't stop there, or rather the genius of Gita doesn't stop there. It takes a real life instance, real life event, and it analyzes it philosophically, and then it draws universally applicable pragmatic principles, which is relatable to any one of us, okay, right from a small child to somebody who's in 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s. I remember, I don't know if you know have you heard about reincarnation, rebirth? Last Sunday I was driving to a program. Actually, I had one young member of our community who was driving the car. I was seated right next to him, and we both were driving. So we have a temple in North Sydney. This year we are celebrating the 50th anniversary. So it's been 50 years since the temple has been built. The deities of Radha Krishna worshipped there. So as we were driving, he was asking me, so how old will you be when we are celebrating 100th anniversary? I asked him, first you tell me how old you will be. He said, like, I'm 25 now, I think I'll be 75 then. Then he asked me, how old will you be? I said, I'll be 5 years old. I'm 40 now, I would have been dead and gone, at least with the current body, but I'll take birth again and I'll be 5 years old there. Point is, we may think that our life is very, very short, but that is based on our understanding, whatever that we are taught, whatever that we could actually perceive. But when we open these books and you try to understand, okay, what is this telling us? It is telling us that our current life is just a little tiny part in our eternity, actually. We all continue to exist. And that brings us to the first lesson. I'm going to show you one beautiful picture. As they say, a picture is worth 1,000 words. It's one of my favorite. We call it the changing body picture. Can you see it? Is it too small? Okay, you'll have a look at it later. So here we see there is a little baby that's been born, and then it crawls, becomes a toddler, and then it grows. Basically, it just shows a snap photo of the different stages of life of a baby, if you see it. Okay, so, you might have seen in, sometimes they do in Facebook also, a father in Korea or somewhere, has taken a photo of his little child for last 30 years and they'll show one after the other. You can clearly see the metamorphosis, of how the body of the kid actually evolved over the period of time, like that. So that's what you see here. Now, in this, one striking thing that would actually stand out in all of this is the body keeps on changing. Okay, even modern science accepts that fact that for every 7 years, we get a brand new body. Every single cell in our body dies at different instants of time, not everything at the same point of time, but it keeps on dying and new cells keeps on getting generated over and over again over a period of time. And at some point, you will see, if you take like a 7-year period, at the end of 7-year period, every single cell that you saw at the start of the 7-year would have ceased to exist. And you will see a brand new body coming at that point of time. So this is something that is actually depicted in this. So this is one aspect you can see. The other aspect that you can see here is there is a soul that is denoted as spark. The soul remains the same. Okay, as I said, I'm 40 years old. I still remember the little baby that I used to be. Sometimes you look at one of your photos when it was taken when you were young. When you look at it, you feel like, yeah, I look cute. Come on. Be honest. All of us felt. But then as we grow older, after you hit middle 40, 45 like that, after that it is pretty much like a damage control mode only. You can't do much. Cells die much more faster than they get reproduced. And at some point of time, it gets even more worse. And there comes to a time wherein the soul inside the body thinks, okay, this body is unusable. I'm just going to quit this body, move on. That's what happens. Okay. It's understandable. We are in this apartment. When we are done with this apartment, we are going to move out. Like that, the soul takes into this body, gets engaged in this body, gives energy to this body, and then the soul activates this body. And through this body, we do a lot of things, but once we are done and dusted with this body, when the body is no longer usable, the soul quits this body, moves to another one. That process is what we call as reincarnation. Comes from Latin, carnal, means flesh. Incarnal means the soul going into the flesh, which means it's quitting this body, and re means again, in means getting in, and carnasia means flesh, which means the soul getting into the body again. That's what it means. Technically, that's reincarnation. Okay, so the journey continues to go like that. Now, what Bhagavad Gita teaches us is what determines what body the soul is going to be given, or what body the soul is going to be awarded with. Is it going to be a plant's body? Is it going to be an animal's body? What body is it? And for that matter, how many options do we have? There is an ancient text called Padma Purana that mentions there are 8.4 million species of life. And it gives even the breakdown of each one of those different varieties of species actually. Okay, there are 900,000 aquatics, Jalaja Navalakshani, like that. It goes Stavara Laksha Vimshati. So 2 million, 1.1 million, Krimiyo Rudra Sankhya, there are each one of the, like how many reptiles are there, how many birds are there, how many different species of life there are. So whatever activity that we do, very similar to what we study in Bible, as you sow, so shall you reap. Depending on whatever activity, whatever karma we do, whatever activity that we do, whatever karma that we actually do in this life, we will be accruing a certain reaction for that. And that reaction will actually get on carried over even in this life. Some will get carried over to the next life as well. I don't know if you have any experience with farming. How many of you have experience with farming or gardening, anything? Yeah. I remember I come from a very small town. My father has done agriculture, still doing. My grandfather, great-grandfather, so we come from a lineage of just growing our own food, most of it at least, cereals, pulses, you name it, we have it. Even cows we have, we take milk. I remember sowing a handful of mustard seeds like mustard-like seeds rather, for spinach, very tiny ones, looks like mustard but like a little brother of mustard and very, very shiny. You take a handful and you sow. You give it like in a few days. First day you will see, or like after a few days you will see some of them sprout. Some would take like a week. Some would take even like 2 weeks, 3 weeks, like that. Our karma is also like that. I may do some activity now. I may get the result instantly in some cases, straight away. In some cases it may take a bit more longer. In some cases it may take even more longer. In some cases it may even go across multiple lives. So whatever activity that we do in this life, we are not reaping the result of the activity that we did just now, but also the accrued result of whatever activity that we did in the past. That could be even across different lives. Okay, that would explain why, bad things happen to good people and vice versa. Once I was in a university mentioning about this point, and one person told me that, one of the students, he was telling, I find it hard to understand how bad things happen to good people and vice versa. I was giving him another example from my childhood days. When we get paddy from the field after cultivation, we have this huge silo. Usually the way how they maintain silo is they pour the grain at the top and they have a small vent at the bottom whenever you want to draw it. So that's like the storehouse, repository. They keep on pouring it and you draw more from the bottom. So I told them, let's say this year we have good harvest, very good quality crops. We would get good quality grains, we'll pour it at the top, and let's say this is filling half of the silo now. Wait for another year, next year comes, weather wasn't that great, harvest wasn't that good, quality of the crop wasn't that great either. So I got like a not so good quality crop. Next year also I go put it at the top. So now this is filling the other half. Now after putting this, if I actually draw the grain, which one will I take first? I will take the good ones first. If someone without understanding what happened last year, if they look at only this particular instant, then all they will understand is there's something wrong or there's some magic happening here, which is not true. What had happened is whatever good grain which I had stored in the past, I'm drawing now. Keep on drawing. Soon I will run out of good grains and the bad grains are going to come out. That's how karma also works. If we don't understand this point that karma is something that you accrue across, multiple years, multiple lifetimes either or even, then you will find it hard to understand the concept of karma. So when I told that, the student said like, yeah, now it makes sense. Because otherwise it will look very unfair, many things, sometimes you will find little kids actually born in a very impoverished condition. Sometimes you will find even bad people going away scot-free without getting caught, and we will think like, come on, wait, good grains are coming out. Wait a little longer, persist, then you will see the natural justice happening. Okay, all of us have, I think, lived our life long enough to realize that, if we do something good, we are going to feel something good inside. If we do something bad, invariably something bad will happen to us. We all have that experience. So lessons like this actually you will understand in Bhagavad Gita, where Krishna just gives a little glimpse. Like here he is talking about just the principles. Okay. Now it won't tell you the specifics in this. Specifics means my name is Ganasham. It won't say, so for Ganasham, if you have problem with whatever, go to this page and read this. It won't tell me that. But if you keep reading this book, you will understand, as we become more and more conditioned, as we become more and more qualified to actually receive this knowledge, just like, let us say, if you go to attend a year 5 class now, you would sit there effortlessly and you will score, 100 out of 100 in every subject you actually sit and appear for test. Why? Because we are all experienced, have done the same mathematics, we have studied alphabets, we have studied grammar, we will do much more, very well now. But at that point of time when we were studying year 5, it used to be such a big mammoth task. So same way, Bhagavad Gita, initially when we actually study, we may not be as receptive as we would be after conversing with the book, after dealing with this book, let's say 5 years, 10 years, 15 years like that. The more we actually give ourselves an opportunity to study this, more we give ourselves an opportunity to take this, let this knowledge sink in and let the wisdom start to act in our value system, then you will see more receptive you will become. So that's why in some instances you will find yoga texts are called revealed scriptures. Revealed means something is covered. Nobody is covering. It's just our lack of receptivity. As I said, you go to a class, you sit there and you think like, I know everything. Okay, chances are more that you're not going to learn much out of the class, even if there is some new thing that comes there. But if we go there with the genuine openness that, yes, I may know this, but let me see, what are the perspectives getting thrown here, then you are going to get more knowledge out of that. So same way, Bhagavad Gita also, initially when you take it up, you may pick up little bit here, there. Continue reading, continue rereading. As we continue to do every single time we actually read, this is a spiritual activity. Like we were chanting some mantra at the start. You might have come across a holy sound called Om. How many of you have heard Om before? Okay, so Om is also a spiritual sound. Like we said, Hare Krishna, Om is also a spiritual sound. Every word has got a certain amount of emotions that's attached to that. Okay, like good words. If somebody comes and calls me, hey, you stupid guy, it evokes negative emotion. If somebody comes and says like, you smart looking guy. Okay, I haven't heard that, but anyway, so you feel good. Okay, but so same way, good words evoke a good emotion, bad words evoke bad emotions or negative emotions. Spiritual words, they evoke spiritual emotions. Om is a spiritual sound. Now, we may not understand what exactly is happening inside, but as I said, the little guy inside, who technically we call it as soul, he understands or she understands. Yes, this is my food. Just like how there is a food for the body, the soul also, when you sit and chant, when we came in, Seva was actually singing, even if you just keep on hearing, we may not fully understand it, but simply by being in that ambience, we feel good. And the reason why we feel good is because, as I said, the little guy inside, he's feeling happy. Yes, finally, someone is feeding me. Okay, so same way when we study Gita, Krishna himself says, whoever studies Gita, they are practicing spirituality by their intelligence. There are different ways how we can practice spirituality. Like now, I'm speaking something spiritual. You are practicing spirituality using the sense of hearing. Okay. At the end, I think Karunavatar would serve you some nice food. There, you will be practicing spirituality by tasting, by your tongue. Each one of these different senses you can use to practice spirituality. Like you see a beautiful photo there. You see a beautiful artwork here. You look at it. Now you are practicing spirituality with your eyes. Okay. Likewise, each of the senses, we have 5 senses, smelling, tasting. If you light an incense, you will feel good. So you will, this way you can understand how you can practice spirituality using each of the different senses. Now this is on a gross level. Subtly also we have senses, mind, intelligence and ego, it's mentioned. Okay, so mind, you can close your eyes and you can meditate. Even if somebody is chanting Om, you can even play something in record and you can just close your eyes, just observe yourself, even with the breathing process, for example, you will feel so good. So same way, when you study Bhagavad Gita, when you hear topics about spirituality, what you are actually doing is, yes, externally we are using our senses to hear, but what's happening internally is we are practicing spirituality using our intelligence. Okay, so we have just these 8 senses. Any activity that we do in this world, this is a homework for all of you. Any activity that we do in this different senses, there used to be one other photo, I couldn't find in this. There is one photo that depicts the relationship between each of these different senses. Okay, if you take each of the 5 senses to be 5 horses of a chariot, the reins that is used to control the horses, they represent the mind. The driver is the intelligence. The chariot itself is our body, and the passenger of the chariot is the soul. Okay, you can understand the relationship. Okay, so which is more superior? Intelligence is superior. Intelligence is controlling the senses. How is the intelligence controlling the senses? Using the reins, and that equates to the mind, like that. Okay, so simple philosophical points. When we actually understand, and now we can take this knowledge deep in, and then we can try to think, all right, so tomorrow, let us say I'm walking through the aisle of a supermarket or something. I see something. This is my eyes now. First of all, looking at an object, and my eyes is now saying, I think you should go and get. Sometimes you go even before you realize the thing is already in your hand. Okay, because now hand has this bad habit of grabbing things. Anything you do, it grabs. We distribute books. Sometimes we see, we have experimented it. Sometimes you hold the book in your hand, whoever you are talking to, they won't respond back. But the moment you put the book somewhere in this range, their hand will naturally come. Involuntarily, it will just come there. Okay, so our hand generally has this habit of, like, you go to a shop, for example, to buy a cloth. How do you buy the cloth? You try to feel it. I mean, what can you make out of feeling? Nothing much. But we feel little comfortable by feeling it, actually. So each one of the senses, they are very active that way. But next time you walk down the aisle of a market, now knowing very well it's the intelligence that's actually holding the reins. Intelligence can actually checkmate that involuntary action, and it said like, nah, do you need it? I don't think so. Drop it, move on. So it can move on. So that's the application of this point, for example. Or let us say tomorrow, like, somebody hurted you, even like, by saying some bad words or something. Mind always has this bad habit. It always remembers the bad things and it keeps on playing, Even sometimes, nighttime you hear something negative, you go to sleep, midnight you wake up, and the first thing you remember is negative thing. Again you go to sleep, early in the morning you wake up, first thing that springs up in your mind is again some negativity. So when something like that happens, we need to understand it's the mind that's actually happening, making things happen like that uncontrollably. But using intelligence, if we start to positively channel this power of mind, positively channelize this power of the senses by engaging in something positive, then it's just a matter of time before you can get rid of all of that. That's again one other lesson which Krishna teaches here. He says the happiness and distress which we experience in this world, they are like seasonal changes. Okay, so just like how you can't hold on to summer for too long, similarly winter also you can't hold on for too long. Same is true even for your happiness and distress. All of us make brilliant plans to be happy in life, and we come to experience that also. But no matter how much we actually try to prolong it, at some point it just goes away. Now, even though we don't make any plan to go through distress, distress comes to us uninvited. Now, this much we would have figured out based on experience, but here is the point which Krishna says in Gita. He says, if you think you can't be happy longer than what you potentially can, you can't be even sad, which means even if you try so hard to be in distressed condition, you can't be. Distress will also go away. But usually when some negativity comes, we tend to think this is it. This is the end of the world. I mean, what can I do? People even go take away their lives also many times without knowing this fundamental point, which is everything in this world is cyclic. It's not linear. But the mind always tends to tell us that it is linear, and being overwhelmed by different emotions, being carried away by lack of reasoning, being carried away by, the spur of the moment, we tend to get caught, and the mind always takes to that vibration of the ambience always. Something negative people says, it will always keep on playing all the time. Have you got this experience? Sometimes suddenly weather gets gloomy. It's gonna rain. You may be sitting in office wanting to do work, but then your mind will say, it's gloomy. Why should you work? Have you got that experience? I used to get that. I mean, what has the gloomy weather got to do with my work? But mind will say that. Mind always taps on to the frequency of the ambience always. That is why it is very, very important to have proper Sangha. You surround yourself with like-minded people. You surround yourself with people who are positive. You surround yourself with people who exude confidence. You will also become. Part of that quality will rub off on you and your mind will hold on to that. Even if here, after this we are going to have a kirtan. You may be feeling little bored, little tired, but you look at others. If others feel like, if you look at others enjoying, maybe I too should enjoy, You also start to get a bit more pumped up and you also start to participate that way. So that little aspect, Krishna actually explains how we should practice Bhakti Yoga this way. Okay? Sangha, we call it ABCDs. A for association. Okay? The company with which we surround ourselves. So that is association. B for reading scriptures like that. Okay? Reading yoga texts like that. You study, you derive the principle of what is actually given there, and then you try to contemplate on that and see how it is applicable to you at every sphere in life, actually. C for chanting. As Seva, wonderfully done. We'll also be doing more at the end, which won't be long. I'll finish now. And then we do some Seva. Seva means, as the name says, it's a devotional service. Okay, so we do some service. Even hearing is a service. You can clean, you can help tidy up this room after the program finishes, n number of things you can actually do. So this way, we actually take the principles from this book, contemplate on it, and see how it is applicable to us. Now, the beauty of this is, in this room itself, we have somebody who is the most senior Bhakti Yogi. We have Seva. We have someone who has been practicing it for maybe 10 years, 15 years. Each one have their own wealth of experience, wealth of realization, which they have actually carried, which they are convinced with. So we can go take some advice from each one of them that way. So that way, we will not only be arming ourselves with this knowledge, with this wisdom, we will not just be confining ourselves with this wisdom or confining ourselves with our access to this wisdom, but we can expand on that knowledge also by reaching out to different people, asking for help. And this is also part of our culture. A tradition here is whatever we know, with power comes responsibility. Spider-Man says that, but it's true even for this one. We study this, we feel happy, now we share it with everyone. In fact, Krishna says at the end of this book, so I've given you all this wisdom. There's one way for you to repay back. And that is by sharing it with others. And that can be a simple act of, Karuna Avatar has got some books there. You can take this and gift it to someone, actually. Even that is fine. This book is so beautiful, just like Om, as I'm saying. Once they asked this question to our spiritual master, his name is Prabhupada, he's the author who translated this in English, that Swamiji, we don't know the meaning of Gita, we don't know the meaning of even Hare Krishna, we don't know the meaning of Om. Prabhupada says it doesn't matter. Just like if you have headache, you may take, Panadol. You don't need to know the ingredients of Panadol. As long as you know this is the right thing to take, just to take it. So same way, this mantra is the prescription that's actually given. As long as you know this is a bona fide mantra that comes from the scriptures, taken straight out of these Bhakti Yoga texts, you can do, mantra will work on you. It will have its effect. And how do we understand that? Proof of the pudding is in the eating. You put that into practice. This is one exercise I give to my students always. Before somebody starts reading this book, I tell them, okay, now take a piece of paper and write down how you define your emotions, your state of mind, how you see yourself as a person, confident, positive, happy, sad most of the times, whichever way. You keep writing it and I tell them, practice this, take up this challenge, practice this sincerely for 2 months or 3 months, and now you write it like a journal. It's a great way for us to actually see. Many times we do nice things, we make a good progress, even if you start a business or something, right? You may be aiming for something like that to get that kind of a result. But how much you achieve may not be on par with your expectation, but somewhere there. But many times we don't take a step back to actually analyze, yes, I started from here, I've still gained. It's not like I did it pretty bad. I've gained. There are lessons learned. Yes, from here I can now take the next step forward. That is a very positive way of looking at things. So that's the approach which Krishna tells us to take in our lives, wherein you take this wisdom, Before you apply this wisdom, you try to analyze where you are, or you try to understand where you are now, and you see where you want to go. Okay, now your time starts, practice this one. And as you are practicing this one along the way, keep some checkpoint along the way to see whether you are heading in the proper direction or not. That's where guidance comes into picture. That's where mentoring comes into picture. That's where association with like-minded people comes into picture. So when we do that over a period of time, we will actually see that, yes, I'm moving from point A to B. I'm not stagnating at one place. Okay, so that's the beauty of this process. So we have this assistance from this book of wisdom, that is actually giving knowledge. Again, what's the qualification to get this knowledge? Just a little sincerity. Try with a humble mood. In Sanskrit, there is a saying, Vidya dadati vinayam, which means one who has knowledge, humility rather. Humility is the result of knowledge. That's what it means. Okay, so if somebody accepts this knowledge as it is with an open mind and try to put that into practice, then they can actually see the results. And it has got nothing to do with religion, nothing to do with faith. This is a simple science. Like, let me draw some parallel between Gita and science. Like, if you see a science, let's take Newton's law. Newton saw an apple from the tree falling down. So this is a palpable, tangible event he is actually seeing. He took it back, analyzed it, and then he comes up with an intangible, invisible, universal rule, what he calls as gravity. He says it's a force that's pulling. So from something visible, he derives a principle which is invisible but universal everywhere. Anywhere, it's not just the apple that's falling down, anything you throw, it's going to fall down. So he comes up with he derives a universal principle by watching a simple event. Same way, let's take Gita. Gita also is science, and I'll tell you how. Let's say somebody is dying, there is death. Visibly seeing, okay, somebody's soul is actually leaving, somebody is not moving no more. So Gita is actually analyzing that, and he's saying, Gita is seeing that event. Yes, this is a tangible event. And then Gita gives the answer saying that the reason why the person has actually died is because the person's, what we call as the body is just the covering of the soul, and the soul moved on. You understand? So from something which is tangible event, one instance of an event, science takes that and it derives a common universal principle. So same way, Bhagavad Gita takes real life instances. Why is somebody going through depression? Okay, or why is somebody getting angry too often? Why is somebody feeling whatever emotion they actually go through? Then it actually goes to the root, and then it gives us the common solution, the principle. Now with that principle you can actually apply that knowledge. Now how do you know which principle to apply? Easy way to do that is, if you go to the back of this book, there is the best portion of this book, and that's the general index. Okay, so you go to this section of the book, and here it will tell you, if you want to know about how to control anger, go here. If you want to understand about how to manage your time, go there, search under T, and there it tells you the page number, go to the page and then read the principle there. Very easy. Or you can ask Karuna Avatar, that's even easier. Or you call me, I'll come back again, So there are ways to actually do that. So it's an easy way. It's a self-help book. You can take it, but there is one famous minister in ancient Indian politics by name Chanakya. He wrote a book called Chanakya Niti, book on morality. He says something interesting. He says when you perform some austerity, let's say you do some exercises, or you do some whatever, jogging, Pilates, yoga, whatever. He says when you do some austerity, do it alone, so you don't get distracted. Okay, so austerity, you do it alone. Studying yoga texts, you do in twos. He says that. Doing group chanting, you do in threes. He says minimum. And traveling, you do as fours. And there is a reason for each one of them. How much time do we have? Okay, I'll be very quick. One line answer I'll give. Reason why he says you do austerity in one is, as I said, you don't get distracted. Second, sometimes we feel too proud. Look how well I'm doing. That is not so good, because negative emotion has its role to play even when it comes to the wellness of our health also. Okay, have you gotten this experience wherein you get angry and you try to sense, your body is like, generally quite warm. How many of you have that experience? Or is it just me? All of us. Thank you. So whatever emotion we feel, they have its effect. In fact, they say one of the common symptom of depression is first your digestive system, general well-being of your body will get affected. You will start to see it very visibly. For no reason, suddenly you will feel something is not right with my body actually. Even though it's just something totally emotion based, but it has its effect. Okay, there is no smoke without fire in that sense. So you do austerity alone. Studying you do in twos, and the reason is this scripture, Krishna himself actually says, if you read 10th chapter of Gita, he says that the way how you are supposed to read this is two of you be together, read this together, and you share your realizations. I go and sit in the classes. I've been reading this for 15, 16 years now. Every time I go sit in the classes, I'm pretty sure there are many here who have read it. But every time you go, you'll always learn something new. Always. You read, reread. Every single time, because one is this, the knowledge becomes revealed in this, but the second aspect is that we become more receptive also. We also evolve as students, definitely. So, whenever we study this book, Chanakya, he says, you study as a pair. And then when you do singing, he says, do it as threes. When you travel, you do as four. Because if there are three people in traveling, one guy sides with the other, then they can potentially, kill the other person. Whereas four means general psychology is they will pair up. So at least all four parties are safe. So in that sense, ancient wisdom. So studying this book, it's very, very easy. So you can take this, you can study, you can read, you can always ask questions. We make videos. We have a group called Happy Jiva. We travel everywhere, all around Australia. That's my fellow monk. His name is Sriman. He releases a video. I also do one. Once a week we do, very religiously. So we try to take one aspect of Gita and we try to make it something which is more understandable in a more contemporary sense. And then we give lessons like that online. Karunavatar, you can come here every week. You can take proper association, Sangha, be in the company of nice people. I've been coming here for, I think, this is like third year now. Almost, second year I think. So every time I come, I always see a lot of new people also joining to this family. So that is very, very wonderful. So please keep coming here and yeah, be blessed. Any questions or comments? Anything unclear? Anything you agree, disagree? Okay. Yes?
So when your soul reincarnates, how long does it take for it to actually find an incarnation?
I love that question. Generally,
You said 5 years.
when I say, I didn't say 5 years.
Oh, I thought from your maths, like when you were saying how old the temple's going to be.
Yeah, that's just a joke.
Oh, sorry.
No, but there is validity in your question and there is specific answer to that question. When the soul actually leaves the body, they say technically it takes, if you're not practicing any form of yoga, especially Bhakti Yoga is they get the body instantly. If someone is not practicing Bhakti Yoga, don't shoot the messenger. I'm just, it says 13 days. And there is a clear description. There is a yoga text called Garuda Purana that tells in detail about what happens during that 13-day period. So let's say if somebody gives up the body today, that's counted as the first day. So you count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 13. During this 13-day period, the soul has already quit this body. So the soul doesn't have gross body anymore. But the soul is alone, along with the mind intelligence. The subtle sense is still there. Soul is given a temporary body called preta. It's not like a ghost, nor gross like ours either. Somewhere in between, it's a special type of body. And the soul in that body feels hunger, feels thirst, goes through all the emotions. Now this 13-day period is like the preparatory phase to go for the verdict as to what is awaiting for him next. So during this 13-day period, the soul is actually given, like have you seen some movies, at the time of death, some Hollywood movies also you might have seen, the whole life will run like a movie. Now that is supported by scriptures especially during this 13-day period, the soul will actually see its whole life as a movie. And in the movie, now the soul is the actor in that movie, but the soul is now taking a step back and watching that movie objectively. And the soul at the end of 13 days would realize, looks like I screwed up or looks like I did something good. So then at the end of 13 days, some punishment is given, the soul is in a more receptive mode, like, all right, I deserved it.
Why does it have to be punishment though? It could just be relief.
Relief also. That's why I said, if it's a relief, good karma, I'm just going extreme examples here, if you ask 13. That's why I said, somebody with good karma, it will be straight away, instant, basically. That's why I said, Bhakti Yogis, if anybody is actually leading a very pious lifestyle, doing that way, then they don't have to go through this. Okay, but in general, that's the description that's given regarding the journey of the soul, like that. Does that answer? So that 5 year, I just said it as a joke.
Okay.
Because
I just had a situation where I received a message from my uncle, and I didn't believe that he had passed over because I was holding on to some belief that I still owed him something, and I cleared that. But the lady that was helping me through the journey is actually a medium, and she said he's only passing now, and that was a year and a half, and I thought, it must be floating somewhere. Really cool stuff. Because he hasn't.
Yep.
It hasn't been that swift.
Yeah. So part of that reincarnation is also good that you're bringing up the point. Again, it depends on the kind of karma which a person has actually gone through. For example, if generally it is given, if a person has taken away his or her own life, in the next life they won't be given a gross body, they would be awarded a ghostly body, like that. So there are some karmic effects also that can give people, not just this one, as I said, there are 8.4 million species, So it can be any one of those. It can be beasts, plants also have got, plants, animals, reptiles, worms, anything could be like that. But the idea here is that I always say this, Gita tells us the stark reality, not to make us feel negative. It will tell us what the situation is. It will also tell you what to do to, overcome the situation. That's one thing I always say. And they lived happy ever after. That's the mood of this book, and that's the mood of all yoga texts, basically. They won't make us empty promises, but they will tell us clearly what is wrong, and they'll tell us, if you head along this path, this is what is awaiting you. Better you retrack and change the course. That's
You can do that.
absolutely. In fact, somebody asked this question to our spiritual master, Prabhupada. How long will it take for somebody to be a bhakti yogi? Prabhupada says 1 moment. It's too late, by the way, everyone who is here. You're already a bhakti yogi. So it takes just 1 moment, and that value of that moment, again, I need a lot more time to elaborate on that, but there are many instances of case studies actually about the journey which the different bhakti yogis have gone through by just doing a moment of devotional practice. Even a moment is enough for us to get rid of, wipe out our record basically, and then get into that fresh new start. Absolutely. Even in this life or even across life, and that could be even at the moment of death. Sometimes some people, they ask me this question, I have somebody who is very close to me, they have already left the body, they have passed away. Is there anything I can do? Absolutely. We can even do bhakti yoga and send the results like a package for them actually. So with everything we actually do, there's a whole procedure for that, but we don't need to do anything hodgepodge there. All you have to do is just chant the mantra basically. And if your intent is, okay, I want this particular person to benefit, they will take it straight away. Okay, so I always say the proof of pudding is in the eating. You don't need to, there's no loss in it basically. You may be doing so many other spiritual practices or nothing at all maybe, but just add, bhakti yoga to yours, and you don't have to even do, as I said, even eating is an act of bhakti yoga actually. That is something anybody can do. Even plants, animals can do. When you sing, even there may be little ants in this room, they benefit actually, like that. So it's a beautiful process, and I'm so happy that I'm thankful to Karunavatar for running this beautiful program. So please keep coming. I would love to visit as often I'm invited. Thank you so much. Any other questions? Otherwise, we can move to the Kirtan.
One last one or two questions quickly.
Otherwise, I'm going to ask you.
We have mantra actually. Her name is Mantra.
Oh, that's a beautiful name. Mantra. Mantra comes from Sanskrit. Mana trayatiti mantra. Man means mind and tra means that which delivers the mind, that which protects the mind. This morning I was speaking to one uni student, Macquarie uni student. So I was explaining about mantra. So he said, so mantra is like a mind booster. I said, like, yeah, if you like to call, that's what it means technically. Mantra means that which protects the mind, delivers the mind, because an idle mind is devil's workshop, as they say. Mind generally tends to pull us down, but mantra keeps pushing us up, basically. That's the idea. So thank you so much for your kind attention and for your wonderful question. Thank you.
I have another question.
Yeah, please.
Um,
If you stop asking questions, I'll go jobless.
I'm a therapist practitioner, and one of my patients or clients came and said she's lost her soul. And so I'm trying to reconnect her soul to her. There's a lot of stuff that we need to clear, but I just thought, oh my gosh, here you are, perfect person to ask. How do you reconnect your soul?
Okay. Good question. There are two symptoms. I'm just speaking based on Gita. How do we know whether a soul is existing in a body or not? There are two symptoms that are given. One is growth. Okay, if I have soul in my body, let's say my hair must be growing, nails must be growing, generally body must be growing. If the growth is there, that's one symptom. Second thing is consciousness. Whenever there is growth and whenever there is consciousness, the soul is there in the body. Now, you take a dead person's body. Is the growth there? No, it's stunted already, which with that we can conclude. You take a small stone outside. Does it grow? No. So that means rock doesn't have. You take a plant. Do plants grow? Yes. Do they have consciousness? Yes. Not as developed as others, but they do. So plants do have souls, you can conclude. You take animals, do they grow? Yes. Do they have consciousness? Yes. So then yes, there is soul. Animals also have souls. Likewise, you take any species, humans, anybody. So first point we need to understand is soul is always, where the soul exactly is residing, that's also given. It's residing in the region of the heart. That's what is given. Okay. That's why generally when it comes to identifying ourselves, we always say, it's me. Intuitively, instinctively we do that, but then that is supported by yoga texts. They say the soul is residing in the region of the heart. The dimension of the soul is, you take the tip of the hair, cut into 10,000 pieces, it's 1/10,000th part of the tip of the hair. That's how tiny we are. Okay, it's such a tiny bit. It's residing at the region of the heart, but its influences throughout this body. Just like in a dark room, you may light a candle. The influence of that candle in the form of light will pervade this entire room. Same way, soul is in one place, but the energy of the soul pervades this entire body. That's why if somebody beats me at the feet, even though soul is not right there, soul can still feel, it's connected. It's still empowering that part basically. So coming to your question, so soul is already there. How can somebody go deeper and connect to the soul? Two ways to do it. The direct process of doing that, which traditionally, if you say ancient days, people sit in meditation and they try to go deeper. What is technically called as, self-realization. Okay, but I've seen people sitting in meditation form and everything. Now, that is one way of doing it. What they call as the Ashtanga Yoga process or 8-step process. Okay, there is Yama, Niyama, Asana, Pranayama, Pratyahara, Dharana, Dhyana, Samadhi. In brief, Yama means there are some things you are not supposed to do during meditation. Like you are supposed to go in a secluded place, for example. You are not to be seated too high or too low. Okay, there are some conditions that's given, or rules, for example. Yama, Niyama, things which you are supposed to do. You are supposed to be vegetarian, you are supposed to be celibate, so on and so forth. Yama, Niyama, Asana, the yogasanas. Surprisingly, I was speaking to a yoga teacher. He told me there are about 8.5 million yogasanas, that many postures. I was telling him there are 8.4 million species, and then he sort of